I used to believe that love meant staying, even when it slowly erased you. My name is Kareem, and I am 78 years old, and it took me most of my life to understand that choosing yourself is not selfish, it is survival. I did not always think this way. In fact, for many years, I thought the opposite. I grew up in a time when sacrifice was praised, especially in love. You stayed, you endured, you adjusted yourself until there was nothing left that could disturb the peace of another person. That was considered strength. That was considered loyalty. And I was very loyal. I met my wife when I was 26. She had a quiet smile and a way of listening that made you feel important, even when you were not saying anything important at all. I fell in love with that feeling more than anything else. I wanted to be someone worthy of her attention, so I worked hard, spoke carefully, and learned to put her needs before mine without even thinking about it. At first, it felt like love. Giving always does. We built a life together. A small house, 2 children, routines that made the years pass quickly. From the outside, it looked stable, even beautiful in a quiet way. But inside, something subtle was changing in me. I began to notice that my thoughts stayed unspoken more often. My preferences became negotiable. My voice softened until it was barely there. It did not happen all at once. That is the strange thing about losing yourself. It is not a dramatic moment. It is a series of small decisions. You choose silence instead of honesty because it keeps things calm. You choose agreement instead of truth because it avoids conflict. And after enough of those choices, you wake up one day and realize you no longer recognize your own reflection. I remember one evening very clearly. I must have been in my early 40s. I came home from work later than usual, tired in a way that sleep could not fix. The house was quiet, the children already asleep. My wife was sitting in the living room, and she asked me why I had not called to say I would be late. It was a simple question, but the way she asked it carried something heavier. Disappointment, perhaps, or expectation. I apologized immediately, even though I had spent the entire day solving problems that were not mine to begin with. I sat down across from her, and she began telling me all the things I had not done, all the ways I had fallen short that day. And I listened. Not because she was entirely wrong, but because I had trained myself to accept that her perspective mattered more than mine. By the time she finished, I felt smaller than when I had walked in. I remember nodding, promising to do better, promising to try harder. Then she went to bed. And I stayed there, alone in the quiet, staring at my hands. That was the first time I asked myself a question I had never considered before. What about me? It felt almost wrong to think it. As if I were breaking some unspoken rule. But the question did not go away. It stayed with me, quietly at first, then more insistently over the years. What about what I feel? What about what I need? What about the life I am living? I ignored those questions for a long time. It was easier that way. There were responsibilities, expectations, and a certain image of what a good husband and father should be. I told myself that this was simply how life worked, that personal happiness was a luxury, not a right. But the truth has a way of waiting patiently. As my children grew older and began to build lives of their own, the house became quieter. The routines that once kept me busy started to fade. And in that silence, there was nothing left to distract me from myself. I began to notice how often I felt tired, not physically, but emotionally. I had spent decades adjusting, compromising, and minimizing my own needs, and it had left me hollow in a way I could no longer ignore. One afternoon, I was sitting alone in the garden, watching the sunlight move slowly across the ground. It was a simple moment, but something about it felt honest. For the first time in a long while, there was no one asking anything of me. No expectations, no roles to perform. Just me. And in that quiet, I realized something that unsettled me deeply. I did not know who I was anymore. Not beyond the roles I had played. Not beyond the responsibilities I had carried. If you took away husband and father, there was very little left that I could clearly define. I had spent so many years becoming what others needed that I had forgotten how to be myself. That realization was painful, but it was also the beginning of something important. I started small. I began to pay attention to what I actually felt in different moments. Not what I thought I should feel, not what would keep things smooth, but what was real. Sometimes it was uncomfortable. Sometimes it led to tension. But it was honest. The first time I spoke up about something that mattered to me, my voice trembled. It was such a simple thing, an opinion about how we should spend a weekend, but for me, it felt like stepping into unfamiliar territory. My wife looked at me with surprise. Not anger, not even disagreement, just surprise. As if she were seeing a different version of me, one she had not met before. And in a way, she hadn't. That moment did not change everything overnight. In fact, it made things more complicated. When you start choosing yourself after years of not doing so, it disrupts the balance that people have grown used to. There were disagreements, misunderstandings, and moments where I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. But something inside me had shifted, and I could not go back. I began to understand that love should not require you to disappear. It should not ask you to shrink, to silence yourself, or to carry more than your share while pretending it feels natural. Real love, I learned too late, has space in it. Space for two people to exist fully, not just one. There came a time when I had to make a difficult decision. Not a loud or dramatic one, but a quiet, firm choice about how I would live the rest of my life. I had to decide whether I would continue as I had always been, or whether I would finally allow myself to exist as a whole person. I chose myself. That choice did not mean I stopped caring about others. It did not mean I became selfish or distant. It simply meant that I began to include myself in the equation. My feelings, my needs, my sense of peace mattered too. And with that decision came a kind of calm I had never known before. It was not perfect. Life rarely is. But it was real. I could sit in a room and feel present, not divided between who I was and who I thought I should be. I could speak without rehearsing every word in my mind. I could make choices without the constant fear of disappointing someone. I wish I had learned this earlier. I wish someone had told the younger version of me that love is not proven by how much of yourself you are willing to lose. It is proven by how honestly you can show up without losing who you are. But life does not always give us lessons when we want them. Sometimes it gives them when we are finally ready to understand. Now, at 78, I do not have the same kind of time I once had. But the time I do have feels different. It feels lighter, more intentional. I am no longer trying to earn my place in someone else's life by diminishing my own. And if you are listening to me now, wherever you are in your life, I want you to consider something gently. Pay attention to yourself. Not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a quiet, honest way. Notice when you are shrinking to keep the peace. Notice when your voice disappears in the presence of others. Notice how often you put yourself at the very end of your own life. And then, slowly, carefully, begin to change that. You do not have to turn everything upside down. You do not have to make grand declarations. Sometimes, choosing yourself begins with something as simple as telling the truth about what you feel. It may feel uncomfortable at first. It may even feel wrong. But that feeling does not mean you are doing something bad. It often means you are doing something new. Something necessary. I spent many years believing that love required me to be less of who I was. Now I understand that the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. And if you lose that, no amount of love from others will ever feel complete. So choose yourself, not at the expense of others, but alongside them. Give yourself the same patience, the same understanding, the same care that you so easily give away. Because one day, you will look back, as I do now, and you will realize that your life was never meant to be lived on the sidelines of your own existence. It was meant to be lived fully, honestly, and with the quiet courage to say, I matter too. And if this story helped you in any way, then start choosing yourself, even in the smallest ways, and let me know in the comments. And if you have a story in your heart, share it too.